Hello, everybody. Welcome to an episode of the Gio and Joey Show with a trusted old friend on the show tonight. Dennis, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you guys again.
Yeah, same
For some
here. Joey, how you doing?
Better than I deserve.
So, Joey, let us know what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly when. I think it was a couple weeks ago now, but I saw Dennis posted something interesting over on Facebook, and I think he posted on Twitter too, but I saw it on Facebook about how everyone's excited about Elon's Optimus Prime robots, and he had a little bit of a cautionary view on the effect that it could have on society, and I figured it would be a good idea to actually just have a broader conversation as Christians, like getting ahead of the curve on how, because listen, we're not going to stop the Optimus Prime robots. They're here, they're going to get better. AI is going to get better. So, like, as Christians, how do we move forward? How do we raise kids? How do we do youth ministry and men's ministry and discipleship and all those things in a world that's going to look a lot different than even the world we grew up in? And I figured Dennis was the perfect guy to have on to talk about that.
All right, so Dennis, what inspired you to write what you wrote about it? And let the audience know your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess short of getting Elon on the show, maybe I'm the second best guy to ever come on and talk about it.
Amen
But
for that.
so I have kind of had a more, I wouldn't say pessimistic. Well, yeah, it's pretty pessimistic view of um of tech in general since since the invention of Google Glass. I don't know if you guys remember
Yes, yeah.
Google Glass 10, 12, 15 years ago. It's kind of the first wearable technology, and it was kind of clunky and didn't take off. But I kind of saw from then, I was like, yeah, I don't think that this is going to be a good thing. I think it's, not to sound too, Amish or kind of a Luddite, but, there's obviously a slow movement towards ever increasing technology and kind of that merging with technology and the singularity. And I don't think there's anything stopping that short of, the end of the world, which may
Mhm.
have to, Jesus may have to intervene before we take ourselves out. Um, but I think it's getting to a point, and it will get to a point where it's just too detrimental to humanity, to what it means to be a human, and it too detrimental to be, um, I think, to have really an effective walk with God. Now, of course, there's always going to be kind of that gray area and the debate of our smartphones too detrimental, as being on the internet, social media.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people can debate these kinds of things, but I think it's just going to get to the point where, just broadly speaking, that people are going to be so immersed in technology, and technology is going to be so immersed and intertwined with our lives, that it is going to make the Christian life almost impossible. And it's going to make, and I can explain kind of some of my thinking
Mhm.
as we get into it, but I just think it's not healthy, and it's kind of removing the part that makes us human.
Mhm.
And obviously the Christian life is supposed to be lived, incarnationally. And I know that's kind of a buzzword that people use these days, but it's supposed to be done in the flesh, and it's supposed to be done in relationships. And obviously we can use tools like this. And I'm happy I got to, meet you guys virtually and
Mhm.
everything. So
Mhm.
that's great. I'm not trying to knock the benefits of it, but um, even Scripture says, and I think it's in Second John, could be even in Third John,
Mhm.
where he writes and says, there's a lot of things I want to write to you, but I don't want to say them with pen and ink
Yeah.
or pen and paper. I want to say it when I'm in person. So there's a certain element to where you just can't live the Christian life in community with people on the internet and virtually
Okay,
and through
so
stream.
let me push back, not in a hostile way, but in a friend. What do you say to the people who says, "Look, we've always had to deal with technology growing, and and like you said, it's up to us to have that relationship with Christ and put the distractions away." What would make this any different in your eyes? And Joey, jump in here as well.
Yeah, I'll let Joey comment too, but I think that so there's kind of three different pieces that I think we'll probably get into to kind of touch on this. There's AI generally, which I'm fairly big proponent of, and I would say probably more than the average person in work and just in my personal life. And then there's virtual reality, so like the Meta, Oculus stuff, those kinds of things. And then there's the robot stuff, Tesla robots. And so there's kind of three different things with the wearable technology and artificial intelligence in general is gonna sort of take over our lives. I don't think we have a lot of control over that, but I do think that the one that I'm most concerned about is virtual reality and the robot thing too, which we can get into. But the wearable technology is, I think that that's going to push people increasingly more and more to live in a virtual space, in a space where you can make reality whatever you want it to be. You can just wear a headset on that isn't burdensome. And then, when I first saw Google Glass, I was still living at home in my parents' basement, which ironically, it looks like I'm still in my parents' basement, but I'm not. I'm in my own basement. So
He's a happily married man.
yeah. So, I remember at the time telling the guys I was working with, I said, imagine how detrimental it's going to be when you can have, Snapchat was just coming out and they had their filters and stuff. And I said, if you can be looking through a set of eyeglasses that if I'm doing a show with Gio and Joey, but I'm like, man, I would much rather be looking at, Sydney Sweeney and, Jennifer Aniston. I can just put something on there. So I'm like, okay, this is who I'm looking at and who I'm talking to. That's something we can kind of laugh about it, but it's like people will go through life making adjustments to the world to make it whatever they want it to be. And like, that's a very slippery slope.
That's not
I know
healthy.
we talk about that a lot, but so that to me, what I always caution people with is like, I never draw a line in the sand for other people, because it is, people who are like, man, you shouldn't use smartphones. Well, once you're on that train, it's hard to unplug from it. It's like, man, I use it for everything now. So I always just say, like, virtual reality for me is like a no-go. Like, I'm just not going to get on the train, so I'll just get left behind. But I do kind of project out into the future where I see things going, and I'm like, boy, I think eventually we're all going to be sucked into the matrix.
Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the main thing I'm taking away is the lack of embodiment, right? So in other words, with a phone, we still kind of lose it, but with this digital stuff, like, people can live their whole lives, right? It's like Ready Player One, for anybody who's seen that, right? It's you can be living in like a trailer park city, but you put on the glasses and you're in a new world, right? And that's your life. You don't even know, right? Are the people you're engaging with, the girls you like, are they even girls? Are they 55-year-old men? Like, in your, they're beautiful women, but they could be, some old man. So it's just, there are troubling things. And like you said, I don't know how we stop the train, but maybe protecting our own kids or our own families from it, maybe that's the best we can do. But
Well, and so to what you said, like, you talked about, talking to, well, I mean, I brought it up, but you reiterated it, like you might be talking to a 57-year-old man, but, in your fantasy, you're talking to a beautiful woman. As Elon kind of famously said, yeah, well, it is. Well, and the thing is, when Elon was on Rogan, I think the first time he was talking about Neuralink. I mean, that's kind of a whole nother level to this, right? He wants to include Neuralink, where you're chipping up and having things stream directly to your brain. So he talked about how we already have this technology with our cell phone. what really is stopping you from having knowledge to anything that you want, or to have an interaction with a 57-year-old man who you think is a beautiful woman. Well, there's not really anything. People do that now on their cell phone.
Hmm.
It's a little
Isn't it
cumbersome because,
called catfishing or
yeah,
something
it's
like
called catfishing. Well, I mean,
that?
and even, yeah, so I just look at where is humanity at now? And the Bible says that humanity, the heart of man is deceitfully wicked.
Hmm.
So it's not like we're going in a positive direction. We're going to keep going in. So you just have to project out, what do we do now with the technology we have, and then just imagine what you would be able to do 100 times, and I think that's I think it's detrimental for a lot of reasons. For one, it isn't embodied living, so you're not living with actual people.
Hmm.
But there's also an element to where um, we learn by disappointments and hardships and failures, and if you can cater and structure the world around you to where none of those things, I don't have a problem picking up a good looking woman because I can just put in my virtual reality and there she is, and I even got a chip in my brain that I don't even have to pretend. I can feel the emotions and the sensations of what it would actually be like. I don't even have to lie to myself. So it's, there's just a lot that you don't have to project and imagine too much to know this is not going in a good direction. And I
Yeah.
think it's helpful for Christians to think about, well, what are you going to do? Like, you can't, because if you just passively go along, it's going to be like what every one of us has experienced with a smartphone.
Hmm.
You get an iPhone 1 and then you're like, okay, I'll get an iPhone 2. And then by the time you get to an iPhone 10, you're like, oh man, this thing's spying on me. It knows every keystroke I'm making, but I can't really unplug now. So I'm going to get the iPhone 12. Now I got the iPhone 15. Oh, now 16 has AI, but I'm not going
Hmm.
to, it's just, you're just going to keep going down that path. And,
So how do you balance it? Because look, some people would say, look, we're dealing with that kind of stuff today. It may be more rudimentary, but there are guys who are addicted to pornography and they watch it
right.
on their phone and they live in a world where that is affecting their day to day. Other guys, like I don't want to pick on you guys cuz I don't know either way, but for me, like you said about not crossing those glasses threshold, right? To me, that's just how I felt about video games. Like I don't play
Mhm.
any video games. Uh, when Nintendo first came out, the Nintendo 64, I had one, and I played it a lot for a year. And then I was like, yeah, nah, this is not. I'm an athlete. I was used to playing baseball, basketball, and football. Every season was a different sport. And so since then, I've never played video games or never owned. I've played maybe with my little brother to appease him or spend time with him. But yeah, so what would you say that it's just people are dealing with that now? It's just in a different form, and we have to use the same principles to control ourselves.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll let Joey jump in because he kind of already started to
Hmm.
hint at it. So I don't know if maybe he's thought more about it, but I do think some of it has to go towards teaching the next generation. There has to be more of a societal conversation, a cultural conversation, but within the church, there has to be, I think, more of a biblical and spiritual rationale behind the dangers of these things. Like,
Hmm.
I think right now we view them as neutral. We
Hmm.
view technology as neutral. Yeah, video games, they can be abused and you can go too far and you can become too obsessed. So you got to have balance with this. So we kind of view this stuff as neutral, but I think we have to begin teaching that, um, again, I don't want to go so far as to say that
Hmm.
they're not neutral, but I don't, I see that the negatives so outweigh the positive that to just present it as, you know, morally neutral, I don't think is helpful,
Hmm.
because people in their sin are going to do what's convenient and comfortable and fun and makes their life better. And I don't know, maybe this gets to a little bit more of the um, kind of Jordan Peterson type philosophy of, needing to do things that challenge you and push you, and you make your bed because even though it's a small thing, it's something that you do. It's a task that you
Yeah, it's part
accomplish.
of discipline.
It's part of discipline. Well, if you have something that removes any level of discipline, then what chance do you have to live a Christian life when that's required? So again, I'm just saying, there should be a conversation about the role that this should play in people's lives. And again, Joey, go ahead. I know you mentioned it, but I've said, my wife and I have agreed, virtual technology is not VR is like not allowed in our house. When our kids turn 18, they'll have to make that decision, but it's not coming into our house. And we've even said we can't say what they do at their dad's or anything, but we've even said we prefer at their grandmas and grandpas that they don't, place, but it's definitely not coming into our home. So,
you mentioned that, and I remember the holodeck in Star Trek, where it was a room where they can imagine themselves anywhere. I used to think to myself, man, that would be cool, right? You could play sports, you could pretend you're the quarterback. But I do see the potential dangers of having that in your head and becoming so immersive that, I'm not a fan of it. I'm a big Apple fanboy, but I'm not even considering getting their whole clunky thing.
Let me give you a thought experiment that I ran, and I've said this to my friends, and they've kind of laughed. They're like, come on, who would honestly do that? Sorry, my kids are home now, so if you can hear them upstairs.
No, don't worry.
But I've explained this to people, and they're like, come on, nobody would do that. And I said, to just laugh it off, you got to think about this kind of stuff because it is what's coming. I said, we're getting more and more to the point where people order their groceries online. My wife and I just did it today.
Yeah.
We ordered our groceries
Actually, we just started doing it.
Yeah, and you go and pick them up at the store. But we're getting more and more to the point where they will just deliver them to your house. Delivery services. And then they'll have automated cars that will deliver it. And then they'll have robots that will pick it up for you. So you get more and more people are getting to where they order their groceries online. More and more they don't have people that check you out at the grocery store. There's not a need for it. There's not a demand for it. So I said, what I predict happening is that Walmart and Costco and all these places are just going to turn into giant warehouses where the food is at that you order. You go on the app and order it, and then you can go to the store and pick it up, or it gets delivered to you. I said, but because people are embodied creatures, that's how we were made from our creator, people aren't going to stand for that. But what they will do is they'll wear their virtual reality. They'll say, okay, Joey, and I can do this. I don't even have to have a friend who's geographically located with me. I could say, hey, Joey, I got to go to Costco and I got to get some groceries. You want to go with me? Sure. Boom. We're both in virtual reality. And rather than just scrolling a website and putting things in our shopping cart, you're actually walking through the store and Joey's next to me walking and we're shopping. It would be perfect because we don't have any screaming kids. We can populate it with the Sydney Sweeneys. Now people are going to be wondering why I've used her twice as an example. But, we can populate it with whoever girl of your choice is just walking around the store, and you're walking through the aisle because we want to have that embodied experience. And then just imagine now how they have all the people that set up stores so it perfectly your eyes go right to that thing and you want to buy it. Well, think about Facebook ads that are perfectly tailored to get, so you're going to be impulse buying the whole way through, and you're going to have no control over, your will is going to be completely overborne as you're walking through this virtual store. People laughing like, why would you go to the store if you didn't have to go to the store? And I said, because we're people. We want to have that, even if it's a cheap imitation of it. And then you just have to let your mind wander. That's a silly illustration with a grocery store, but everything's going to go that way. We talked about people addicted to pornography. You don't have to do it on your phone now. You can actually go to a brothel now, virtually, and it's indistinguishable from reality. So you just and people think, well, that would never happen. I think, where is your biblical anthropology if you think that people won't do that?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there's people doing it now. I mean, you people. I was surprised when I found out that the metaverse and some of those, that you can watch pornography in that. And so, people are, I think one of the dangers that we're talking about, and maybe we haven't mentioned, is that the enemy is using a divide and conquer approach. And that's what he's doing with all these things that isolate us. And it goes contrary to scripture, right? That says, do not forsake the assembling of one another as you see that day drawing near. So it's a divide and conquer. We definitely have to be careful about it. Joey, you've been very quiet.
Yeah, no, so I've just been listening to everything you guys are saying and thinking about it.
Well, there's three of us. If you're not going to talk, we just kick you out, and Dennis and I will talk.
One thing that's been reverberating in my head is how much, like, I think this stuff does have its own trajectory. So in other words, technology, the tech companies, they want to create more and more addictive technologies, and they want it to be more and more immersive because that's more and more profits for them. That's easy to understand. But how much of the progression, I wonder, is also from the fact that people don't have good real life experiences, right? Maybe they don't have, as men, they don't have places to go with other men and just be guys, right? And so they go to the video games, or they go to, older school like football and, whatever their sports are. And so it drives them more into the tech world. Or kids aren't going to the mall to hang out anymore, right? Like when I was a kid. So instead, they're going to chilling in a chat room. And so it's like both forces, I think, are feeding the direction maybe separately, but then combined, I think they kind of feed it together. So people are more likely to want to go into that. Because so this is something, and it's going to seem like a little bit of a tangent, but something I was talking with a friend of mine about Trump rallies and how, like, there's been this desire, right, regardless, and this is not saying anything about Trump, like, bad or good, except that there's been this kind of desire that, like, politics is going to be all virtual now, right? And it's just about, we're going to vote online, we're going to do all this stuff, whatever. And yet the most exciting political events of the last 10 years are Trump rallies. And there seems to be a revealed preference for that kind of thing, right? In other words, yeah, you can just do your politics online and watch your podcasts, but people still, like the politicians that have a movement, that have fervor, right? Bernie rallies were the same thing. They were lots of people, they were energetic. And so I wonder if, and that's in the world of politics, but I wonder if there was like an authentic fellowship and authentic, alternatives. If maybe not all, there'd still be some people, I'm sure, who choose their addiction, but if we'd actually see people have a revealed preference for the real, and they're going to the fake because, maybe the church or school or whatever is not offering them something better. I don't know.
There's an element to where, and I think the toxic side of this is borne out in kind of American Christianity, kind of consumer Christianity, where there's an element to where the church and the things of God are competing with the things of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the church, I think, unfortunately, tries to mimic the world. It tries to
too often.
To run with your political analogy, Joey, Trump, there's something about going to a Trump rally. There's something about going to a Bernie rally. Well, we saw something very similar to it with Kamala's rallies, but those were very artificial. It was come look at Beyonce, and then you can hear Kamala speak afterwards. But people will spend hundreds of dollars to go see Beyonce. Now you can go see her for free. You just got to listen to Kamala Harris. When you can argue whether or not that's a bigger price to pay than the ticket. But that was not authentic. It did not translate into actual support for this person. There was no buy-in for Kamala Harris. It was very, and I think that the church, because it knows it has to compete with the things of the world, does that, where it's like, well, let's do what the world does, but let's do it with Jesus, and it ends up being lame. I mean, we know that.
Yeah.
It ends up being lame. It's like, oh my gosh, like, we're trying to do, it's like the Willy Wonka. Do you guys remember about a year ago where the Willy Wonka exhibit over in New Zealand or whatever? If you guys have not watched this, you
No,
guys got to
no.
look this up. I'm sure you can still find it. Some guy ran a scam over in New Zealand and advertised this Willy Wonka world experience, and people showed up, and it was like this empty warehouse with like, it was, you got to look it up.
Okay.
Anyway, it ends up being like that, where it's just a poor imitation. It doesn't compete. People are like, oh, this is hokey. It's boring. I can get a better show on YouTube. So
Yeah.
there's an element to where we're competing, but I think that we're competing the wrong way. We're trying to fight the way the world fights, and it's, ends up being a pale imitation. And then people go for the alternative rather than the authentic.
I remember when I was coming back into a faith-saving relationship with the Lord, that I used to say if I wanted to go to a rock concert, then I'd go to the real thing, not some imitation at church, right? If I'm going to... A well-known preacher in our denomination named David Asherick, a man with his cachet can say something like this, but he got invited to speak somewhere, and he was like, can we cut off the strobe lights and the fog, and let's get back to authentic Christianity? Turn on the lights. God is about the light, not the darkness. And,
you're right.
It's true. We try to imitate the world, and it's not about that. It's about authentic Christianity.
Well, so I think, I mentioned Jordan Peterson offhandedly, and now I don't necessarily advocate people go to listen to Jordan Peterson for his theology, although he does have some good things to say every once in a while. But there was an element to where you saw something with him where people would go and spend hundreds of dollars to listen to, essentially a sermon, but a teaching for a couple hours. And so he was offering something that resonated with people, and the church doesn't have that. There's something, and I'm not sure what it is. I do think some of it does speak to it is like men in particular want that challenge. They want to do hard things, and we recognize that it's a weak man who's addicted to pornography. It's a weak man who's sitting around playing video games all day. It's like he's not doing anything that's actually challenging. And so I think that these technological advancements, virtual reality, Neuralink, artificial intelligence, robot, the Optimus Prime robot thing, it's removing Jordan Peterson, when he talks about making your bed, that's a small step you can take towards doing very difficult things in your life. If you never make your bed, you're never going to, go on to do bigger and better things, so to speak. Well, having to actually go to sleep early on Saturday night, for you gentlemen, it would be Friday night, but not go out and party Saturday night, so I can wake up early, take a shower, get dressed, go to an actual physical location. It's my day off of work. I would love to sleep in, but I'm going to go up and I'm going to,
Worship,
that's not a huge challenge, or it shouldn't be. But if we have a world that takes away even the simplest task, you got to walk down to the store and get a creamer. No, thanks. I'll just send my robot down to get it for me. Every little, make your bed type situation in your life, you'll have somebody else do it for you. You'll just be infantilized your whole life. You'll never be challenged to do anything difficult and have to face any hardship. The virtual reality, I'll make reality whatever I want it to be. I don't even have to look at unattractive people anymore. Like, make them all attractive, So it's like...
That might be worth it. Not just kidding.
Yeah, so like that's... I really think like...
Wasn't there a Disney movie of something like that? Right? Where Wally's...
Wall with a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Where they had the robots. Everyone was like fat people floating around in wheelchairs. And stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought the same thing. We just took our boys to go see that new movie, The Wild Robot. And that's kind of a dystopian world where obviously must have been global warming, flooded everything out or whatever. But like everything is like the robots now. There's a corporation that runs the robots, and the robots make all of our food for us. And it's just, you watching, you're like, that's not a future we want, but it's a future that we're headed towards. And Elon Musk, although we kind of love him right now, I think because he's the darling of the right, he's leading us down that primrose path. You know, all of these
Yeah,
dangerous things he's spearheading. So, I don't know how much, how much
but I
love we
think
should have
you
for him.
said it earlier though. The genie's out of the what's the thing genies come out of?
Genie's out of the bottle. Yeah,
Yeah,
the genie's
genie's
out
out
of
of
the
the
can.
bottle. So you can't stop. When people say don't let your kids use an iPad, well, that's the world they live in. So everything has to be guided responsibly. Um, you can't stop him from creating these things. So what are some of the principles that we can teach and that we can use ourselves to guide these things? Because look, for example, let's say it's an elderly grandmother who can't pick things up and you give her a robot that can help her get around. Wouldn't that be useful? Because you can't be around all the time, right? You have a responsibility to your spouse and your children. You may be in another state. I mean, like, how do we balance this? Joey, you were going to say something?
Well, first on the iPad and kids thing, like I'm actually on the thing like there is literally no benefit to kids having iPads, right? And everybody says, "Oh, but they can read so much more." It's like, no, like there's literally
Give them a
evidence that the
book.
reading
Yeah.
ain't it. But that's another thing. But to your question,
Hold on, though. Spoken of a man who hasn't been on a 6-hour car ride with 3 kids.
well, okay, but here's the thing: that's the benefit to the parents, and there could be a benefit to that. I'm just saying, like, as far as like people saying like there's an educational benefit or kids need an iPad, like I think that's overblown, and that's
Yeah.
like there's no actual educational benefit.
And so doesn't that even get to the point, and I agree with you, Joe or Gio, like, again, trust me, I'm only 6 months into this thing. And I understand when we go on a trip, we want them to have their Kindle, but even that we regulate, we
Yeah,
give them a half
exactly.
hour.
I think that's the point.
But, I just think like, now I know my parents, they gave us stuff to distract us or whatever. But I do think parents will give their child a screen almost like it's a pacifier,
Yeah.
and it's like, you're doing a disservice to your kid, but you're doing a disservice to yourself too. Because like when we talk about what are you robbing of yourself, of your humanity, to have to learn to the skill, work that muscle of patience and kindness
Boredom for
and
kids.
graciousness. Well, for the kids, boredom, but like
Yeah.
to have your kids screaming, and asking, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? It's like, if you just give them a pacifier so they shut up and leave you alone, then you're also robbing yourself of the growth that you could have by having to deal with that kid. I always tell people when we have our, I go to a small church, 30, 40 people on a good Sunday, but we have a lot of kids. So we're probably, a third of kids under 18. And, sometimes they're kind of noisy, and people are like, well, you need, and especially when we do our house church, kids are running around like crazy. And I just think you're the adult. You learn patience to filter them out and to pay attention to the person that's speaking or whatever's going on. It's like, you learn that. Don't ask the 4-year-old to be the one that's a mature
exactly.
person. You learn it.
Like, for example, in my household, real quick, Joey, the girls only get to watch videos on Sunday, right? And if we go on a long trip, they don't get to watch the videos on the way there. It's only on the way home, right? Because one thing we're big on is you got to learn how to deal with boredom on your own. So now they've caught into the looking at clouds and see what shape they look like.
Yeah.
But it's true. You got to regulate, but you can't keep them. I don't think you can't keep them away totally from it, because that's the world they live in. You and I aren't riding horse and buggies, right? We live in a world with cars, and you just deal with it. But everything has to be regulated. Joey?
Yeah.
So I will say one thing that I've noticed. Just obviously, I'm younger than everybody else here, but I still can remember when the iPhone came out. But even before then, right? Like I didn't get an iPod till I could pay for it myself. But one thing that I remember just about my childhood, and then I compare it to some of the kids and stuff that I see, whether at church or the friends' kids or stuff, and it's like there is in a lot of kids today a lack of like just an adventurous spirit, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
me and my friends, like this is just one anecdotal example, but me and all my friends out in the country, right? Like we could count down the days until we turned 14, 9 months in Michigan, which is when you can go to start driver's ed, because we were counting down the days, and as soon as we turned it, we were getting our permit, and we were going through the thing, because being able to drive, that meant freedom. That meant we could go out, two trekking in the woods in my buddy's Jeep, right? That meant we could, get out of the home. And a lot of kids I see today, and they're perfectly content to get home from school and, maybe their parents make them do homework and then go and put these headphones on and play Fortnite, and their friends are all in their rooms and their separate houses. And the kids are perfectly content to do that. And I'm like, me and my friends, like, we would have been so bored. I mean, if we'd have been raised in it, we probably wouldn't have been bored with that. But it's just like, it strikes me as something inhuman about it. And I feel like I'm glad that I had the childhood I had. And so when I see kids that spark, and I'm like, no, guys. So that's
Yeah,
just my
but let me bring in, because I have three girls. They're 9, 6, and 3. They live in this world where they could have all that, but they don't. They are living outside, right? They enjoy being outside. Granted, they like their Sundays with their iPad, but that's where the parents have to come in. But Dennis, you mentioned it earlier. It's when parents begin to use it as a pacifier that you're both going down. Both the parents and the kid are going down a direction you don't want to go, which then leads to adults who go down that direction.
So I think that ultimately, I do think that the conversation within the church, and I'm kind of a one trick pony when it comes to this stuff,
No.
but it does come down to discipleship.
Yes,
and
I was
people have to
wondering where
be-
you were going to bring it up.
There it is. So I try to look at a lot of things through like the Romans 14 lens, where we're dealing with gray areas. They're dealing with, eating meat or vegetables or, Sabbath days or whatever, they're dealing with stuff. And the thing that Paul keeps coming back to is, each person has to be convinced in his own mind. And if it's not from faith, it's sin. So if you are not convinced that you're doing what the Lord would have you do, it's sin. You don't have the conviction in the go ahead from our Lord that that's okay. And so I think a lot of these conversations need to be much more about that. They need to be in that Romans 14 category, where it's like you need to be mature enough and convinced in the Lord enough that it's okay for your kid or for you or for your family to have this piece of technology and use it this amount of times. And if one person's like, nope, it's a red line, I'm not doing any of that, then they need to be convinced in the Lord that this is the line, and they need to stick to it. And then not judge the Christian who does, because and condemn, likewise back and forth. But if the Christian's just passively going through and just whatever technology, hand it to me, I'll just passively forward it on to my kid. Well, then, okay, we can make rules in Christianity all we want about don't use this tech. You can get a robot, but no VR. You can, then all we're doing is creating laws then at that point and trying to.
Yeah, so there's got to be hardcore principles, right? And to me, one of the principles that is emerging is fellowship, right? It's that personal fellowship of meeting people where they are. And virtual reality, people have to understand, is not reality. I don't care what they call it, right? It's not reality. Reality is reading to your kids. It's spending time with your kids. Forget the kids at the moment. Spending time with your friends, like face to face. Even though we're using technology, this is not VR. This is, I'm seeing you for who you are, and we're having conversations. And that's true whether it's in the 1960s and you're dealing with comic book strips, right? People who are getting too deep into that. And fantasy novels, that's another dangerous thing, right? When your whole world revolves around that. So the principle is actual relationships, discipleship.
Yeah, and so this goes to I mean, now I'm going to kind of do a 180 and like advocate for when VR and that kind of, because again, we're talking 20, well, probably not even, I mean, 20 years in the future is not that far, but this is kind of probably a couple generational thing where people are living in what we could call the matrix, where they're just plugged in all the time. They wear that thing all the time. They wake up, it's on. They're living in that virtual reality world. Sure, they can take it off, but in reality, they're not doing it. They're sitting on the couch. They're, wearing that thing all the time. To which I would say, I don't think that Christians should say, well, you know what? That's where the people are, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have VR church, and we're going to have VR. I don't think that's the answer. But I do think a proper answer would be what we do now is there's people there that need Jesus. Missionaries need to go there. So we need to have missionaries who are VR missionaries. That doesn't mean not every single person's called to go to Papua New Guinea, but the people who are, it's like, we're going to go and we're going to make sure you go and we're going to make sure you're grounded and supported in prayer. So, okay, that's where the world is at. 70% of the population lives in virtual reality. Well, we're going to send our missionaries to virtual reality, into the matrix, because I do think, like, one of the things I love, people hated the new Matrix movie, but I kind of loved it. The newest one, the fourth one, that just came out a couple years ago. I kind of loved it because everything that the Matrix represented, that the Matrix was a lie. It was a world that was created to enslave humanity. In the real world, as much as it sucked and it was a struggle to live in the real world, it was preferable to the Matrix, which was a lie and it was slavery. I mean, it's a perfect analogy, and I'm not the only one who does it, but it's a perfect analogy for Christianity. And well, in the fourth one, and the newest one, when Neo gets back out of the Matrix into the real world again, and 60 years has passed, and he realizes, wait a second, you people have made peace with the robots. There's still billions of people plugged into the Matrix. What did we fight for? We need to go back in and rescue these people out of there, So he goes back in to get Trinity back out. So, like, there is that element to where it's like, even if people are going to plug into the Matrix, like, we're obligated to go in there and get them. But that still doesn't, that's a missionary endeavor at that point. As strange as it is to think about in those terms, but it's going to be a crazy world.
Because the principle behind that is that we are to seek and save the lost wherever they are. Right? We're not expecting them to arrive at our churches and be like, save me. Right? We have to go out.
Right.
I want to point out that, another principle that points out is, imagine living in a family where everything is completely oversalted. And then you find out, wait a minute, that kind of oversalting is no good for the health. So then you go back and start eating normal salted food. How is it going to taste? It's going to taste bad, right? Because you're used to the oversalting. And so people have to understand that there is a danger in overstimulating, and that's what virtual reality does, that once you go back to the simplicity of the Word of God, actually reading and turning pages, it's going to lose its flavor because you're so used to the hyper stimulation. And so that's another danger why we try to guard our kids and even ourselves. We hardly watch TV. We hardly do a lot of things because we need that time for the still small voice to talk to us.
Yeah.
I'm about to kick Joey out because he doesn't talk.
He's soaking it all in.
So bringing it back to something you said before about how the consumerist church, right, is not going to be able to compete, right? Like, if we're trying to compete in entertainment value with VR and with robots and with all this tech and video games and all that stuff is going to win out in the entertainment realm. But I wonder, and particularly with boys and young men and whatnot, if the answer is rather than just a consumer church, but a church that actually requires things of these young men, right? So a church that says, hey, we need you to be a deacon, right? We need you to be here every Sabbath or every Sunday, right, to pick up offering or to lock up the church after everybody's gone, or whatever it is, or make sure that the driveways shoveled out, or the steps, so older people don't slip and fall, right? Whatever it is, right? But just actually requiring them to do something. And I wonder if maybe that is one way in which now it's not about just entertaining, but you're actually plugging someone into the life of the church, right? An embodied life of the church.
Yeah. Well, I think that the imagery of the body of Christ, it is every member doing its part.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't it isn't enough for you to have an arm. Even now, today, in the physical church where people show up and occupy space, the principle still holds that, every person is a part of the body of Christ. They have a role to play. They have something to do. And the body is not healthy just by the mere presence of the body part. If you've got an arm, but it can't function, but it's there, well, that's no good for the body. It can't, if you can't reach out and grab something, of what use is an eye if it can't see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Joey's right that even now there needs to be more of an emphasis where we're expecting people to do something. Mm-hmm. And that I think is part of when we go back to the teaching of, responsibility, obligation, duty, challenging people. There has to be that. I think that's what people are missing is they think, what do I come here for? To listen to some guy talk for 45 minutes and to listen to some music? I can listen to Hillsong at home. It's better than these people standing in front of me singing. And I can listen to so-and-so on the radio who's a better speaker than this guy. Mm-hmm. What really do you require of me? Nothing? Okay. Oh, you just want my money? That's all you want? Yeah. Well, that's really going to offend people. So it's like, no, there's something that you contribute. And we all suffer if you're not contributing that thing. So, I mean, that's just going to be amplified more and more and more as we head down this road.
Hey,
but it's going to be harder when the bridge is going to get, the gap, I think, is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger between people who are entirely disconnected and people who are completely all in.
And that harms the church and, more than the church, it harms the individual. Let me take this in the few minutes, respecting your time that we have. When my wife and I saw the Optimus Prime video that was circulating, her first thought as a woman was, I wouldn't want this in my house. What if somebody hacks it to harm me? Your thoughts on that?
I didn't think that. It is funny that I had a coworker who thought the same thing about self-driving cars. Mm-hmm. I said, boy, wouldn't it be a lot more convenient if every person was in a self-driving car and they all communicated with each other so there'd be no more accidents, there'd be no traffic jams. Boy, it would be so convenient. And he goes, nuh-uh, I wouldn't trust that. Someone could hack into that thing and crash it into you or whatever. And I said, that's not you distrusting the technology. That's you distrusting people.
Yeah, human.
A person's going to hack into that thing. So, but you're right. A person could hack into this robot and cause it to go haywire. I mean, that's not. I didn't think of that, but that's certainly a danger. Again, I think the danger is more. As I think I posted in that post that I made that Joey was initially referring to, the danger I think is much more. What do you become as a human if all of the little tiny things that you have to do, that you don't really want to do, now you don't have to do? It's like I always thought, like, boy, when I saw Star Wars, I thought, man, it would be awesome to have the Force. Yeah. Like, and it's just like, yeah, right. What would I do? I would never get off the couch. I would use it to, pull my video game controller over to me so I didn't have to move. I would just tell a robot to go get it for me. I wouldn't even get off the couch. I would just tell him, go get that remote control for me. Well, you do that a couple hundred times in a day. And then you do that 7 days a week.
The old adage, right? You don't use it, you lose it. And
right.
And something I've noticed for myself, I write a sermon every week, so that's about 10 pages, double space, and I do a lot of emails that I've lost dexterity in writing, pen, because everything's keyboard, which is why sometimes I just open my pad and write. And then, but ready, goes to show you how AI is. Then I take a screenshot of what I wrote, put it in ChatGPT, and it transcribes it for me, and I put it in my digital journal. But I've been doing it because I want to keep that ability to write cursive.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think that's why I think the gap's going to widen between, because I think Joey's right. What we need and what we will need is a call to adventure for people. We have something for you to actually do here. And ministry is not easy. It's hard to serve other people. It would be easy if people weren't involved, but they are. So you have to deal with that. And it's difficult. And the more and more we widen that gap where people don't have to even do the simplest thing, just imagine, like, okay, I don't even have to get up and get my remote control. Now Joey's asking me to wake up Saturday morning at 7:00 to go for 4 hours and rake, Mrs. Smith's yard for her because she's elderly. No, I'm not doing that. I'll send my robot to go do it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you have to do it. That's the point. We want you to do it. No, I'm not going to do that. If that's the case, I'm not coming. Yeah. That's the reality I think we're going to face.
But no, it's not a but. It's a caution, right? Those of us who believe in biblical principles, that's where we have to fight off that temptation, because the temptation is going to be there. And as the prices of these Optimus robots come down, people are going to want to get one, because help me pick up, like I was just thinking as you were mentioning, like I lift free weights, and sometimes the most annoying thing is changing the weights, especially on the leg press where I'm putting like 7 or 8 45 pounds, and I would leave it there, but then my wife is like, no, I want to use the leg press, you got to take them off. Wouldn't it be nice to have a robot do it for you, right? But then I was just thinking, even though it's not part of the exercise, taking them off and on does help. Forearm strength, right? 45 pounds weight. So it's those little things you don't know you'd be missing out on if you go down this path.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I don't think we'll recognize what we've lost until it's just like cell phones now. People look back and think, holy cow, we've destroyed an entire generation. Emotional, relational health, suicidality, all mental health, we didn't know that was going to happen, but we didn't realize how much we were chipping away at our humanity by letting people plug in so much.
One thing that gives me some hope in that, though, is the fact that people are miserable. Right? And that sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they hit rock bottom.
That, we achieve this and people are miserable tells me that people do want human community. Right? And so that if we actually offer them fellowship, if we actually offer them adventure, right, and a path to get there, right, and we're willing to come alongside them and help them do it, then maybe it'll always be a minority, but there's always going to be people coming to the truth, coming to the church, because at the end of the day, no matter how fancy and stuff this gets, people are still humans. And they're going to be miserable at some extent. And so maybe that's our one silver lining is their misery.
Hey, Dennis, before I give you the last word, you mentioned the cell phones, and obviously in the context of this conversation, there was a study, I think it came from the UK, as girls and boys have gotten cell phones, boys have become more conservative, and girls have become more woke and liberal. And it shows you the effect it's having on a generation of kids. And so, that's the real world implications of letting these things run amok if we let them. Give us a final word here.
Yeah, I'll just I'll do this as a shameless plug to just kind of also
Yeah, go ahead.
mention that I'm writing a book on the Book of James. So
Nice.
that's where my mind's been for the past 6 months or so. But um, when he opens the book with the famous passage, consider it all joy, brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your
Mm-hmm.
faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete or mature, lacking in nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I make the point to say that he doesn't qualify what trials and hardships are. We
Mm-hmm.
tend to think, my mom got cancer, I wrecked my car, a tornado destroyed my house. Those are big trials. That's like being thrown into the lion's den type trial.
Mm-hmm.
But Daniel didn't start there, and he started with, am I going to eat this food or am I not? And so we face trials every day. Am I going to get up and get that remote control, or am I going to sit here and keep stuffing my face with Cheetos? Am I going to get up and take the dog for a walk, or am I going to watch another show of? And those are actual trials and their hardships. And I think like doing those things produces endurance. And if we persevere in endurance, obviously including all the things James talks about, it does lead to maturity and to completion. But if we undercut ourselves by eliminating all of those little trials when it comes to, the lion's den type stuff, we're not going to have the infrastructure in our lives to face those things.
Yep. A preacher named Whitley Phibbs said, "If the mountain was smooth, you couldn't climb it."
Oh, there you go. I like it.
Right? So there's got to be trials. And even with this AI stuff, the principle doesn't change. You have to stay centered in Christ, and the rest will take care. Don't let nothing distract you from Christ, whether it's, pornography, video games, virtual reality. Stay centered in Christ. Joey, you want to say anything real quick?
Yeah, I guess my final thought would be, you know, it, it's not avoidance completely, but it's don't let technology be your master, right? Let it be your helper, maybe, let it be your assistant, let it be a tool, but don't let it be your master, right? Whether it's, have your religious life that's in person, have your educational life that's in person, right? Have a life of the mind where you're actually reading books, or even in the technological realm, rather than always seeing it as the entertainment and the porn and the all of this stuff, right? See it as a challenge to master as a career at the very least, right? Like rather than being the guy who's being replaced by robots, be the guy building robots. In other words, just have your life mastered in the real world. Because you look at Mark Zuckerberg, guess what? Mark Zuckerberg's not on Facebook all day. Right? His kids
Yeah.
aren't on Facebook all day. So it's be the master of your own life, right? Put Christ first, obviously, and then put your real world first and use these things as tools. Use these things maybe as an occasional fun thing if that's something you think you can do, but don't be mastered by it.
All right, Dennis, let people know where they can find you. I know you have a podcast, so let them know.
Yeah, Faith and Focus is you can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get podcasts. It will say Faith and Focus, a ministry of InFaith. That's the mission organization I'm a part of. I did discover that there's another podcast on YouTube called Faith and Focus, which is much more popular than mine. So it's the first one that comes up, and it's Mormon. So it's not
Not
even something I would want
affiliated.
people to accidentally stumble across. So so Faith and Focus, the logo will say a ministry of InFaith, and you can
Okay.
find me there. And then formerly Dennis on X.
Okay. All right, brothers. Thank you very much. Once
All
again,
right.
Dennis, it's been a while. We should do it again soon. Until next
Yeah.
time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed.